So my name is Ian James Cooper. I have brain, what kind of brain it is. My wife could say that because it's a lot harder to say.
Brain cancer. So he was diagnosed with glioblastoma at the age of 30.
Yeah. And now it's almost
5 years.
5 years. Yeah.
So he was diagnosed 5 years ago
hmm
with glioblastoma, which is a very aggressive, malignant form of brain cancer. It's basically a terminal diagnosis, and he was given about 2 years to live.
Yeah.
I think most patients are given a prognosis of 12 to 18 months, but because of Ian's age, they said that he could expect about 2 years with therapy, with chemotherapy, radiation, with treatment.
Yeah. We were at I was at the house, and all of a sudden, when I was working and I was doing something, taking off a
Installing a light.
yes, and then all of a sudden I couldn't talk, I couldn't really think about anything, and then my mom was there, and so she knew there was something going on, so she called.
She called 911.
Yeah, and then so they came in, and they said, so they knew that there was something up, so they took me to the I'm not even there yet. It was at the house still.
The paramedics took you out.
Yes, and then right then I started what's it called?
Had a seizure.
Yes, yeah. And so, and then the next time that I opened my eyes was about a year, or not a year. See, this is what I do all the time. Not a year, a day. But it was probably about a day, right? And so at that point, they didn't know what it was. They could tell there was a big
mass.
Yes, yeah. And so, and at the time, they didn't think it was anything big. They thought it was just they thought it was.
We were told that the mass in his brain was a cyst.
Yeah.
And that they would just remove it, and it sounded like it's brain surgery, but it sounded like a kind of straightforward procedure.
Yeah.
We were living in Alaska at the time.
Yeah.
And so in hindsight, it would have been, now knowing what we know, it would have been great to get second and third opinions.
Yes.
And all of that before saying okay to brain surgery.
Yes.
But it was kind of an urgent thing.
It was, yeah.
A cyst didn't sound like the thought of it being brain cancer never even
Didn't,
occurred
at all.
us.
And so, so we went back again. They had me. So they did a what's it called? For my
a surgery.
Yeah, and that's when they found out that it was. I think it was like 2 days after that. They told me what it was, which is pretty much one of the. And I always think about this because whenever a doctor tells you something and they have a hard time saying it and they're kind of crying, they're not almost crying, it's not gonna be good. And so when I knew that, it was like I kind of knew what I like. What am I supposed to do? There's nothing that, because I could tell that the doctors kind of looked at it as there's nothing to do, nothing you can do. And not to be mean or anything, I think just a lot of them really don't think about other ways to do. And so at that point, we were kind of like, okay, and especially me. I was like, at that point, when something like that happens, you can't even think about anything really. But I think the Lord, that my wife started looking at different things, and then we hadn't really started too big, but the first thing that we started, like right after we got out of the to the doctors, is we started doing keto. And still to this day, that's what we do. That, I mean, there's some days that I'll won't be keto, but I would say for 3 or 4 years, I didn't do it. I did it completely. Never did anything else.
Everything was so overwhelming at first. We were still in the hospital.
Yeah.
He was recovering from a surgery, and I think my sister texted me and mentioned that she had seen a lot of research. I think it was like she texted me a link to a Johns Hopkins site. It was possibly the Charlie Foundation, I think. I can't remember exactly, but that was one of the first sort of websites that I saw that had that sort of medical authority, right, on keto. And so we just immediately figured, why not change his diet?
Yeah.
That seems simple enough. And it was very difficult at first.
Yeah. Not as much. I mean, I was fine with it just because I was kind of like, hey, I'll do whatever we think could help. But I think she was having a hard time, not hard time, but especially with the kids and everything. So it was the kids' food and what we do. And then the stuff for me. So it was kind of like two different things she had to do. And she got rid of all of everything that we had.
I kind of went a little bit overboard with like, we're not eating anything that is processed or, and I'm sure this happens to a lot of people when they are, faced with a diagnosis like that. I have loosened up tremendously since, but yeah, so we came across keto that way, just kind of from family. And then I think from that point on, I felt like it was my job to just learn as much about Ian's diagnosis as possible.
Yeah.
And learn about what other people were doing and support him in that way, because he was just busy doing treatment and working. I mean, he returned to work and worked for a full year after his diagnosis. And so, this sort of how we found out about different therapies, different approaches.
And at the point, I mean, for a while, like about a year, it was not even a year. I thought everything was good. Maybe it was about a year when I found out that it wasn't even that. The first, what's it called?
We think. So he did chemotherapy, the standard of care, which is chemotherapy, for about 6 months.
Yeah.
And then he did a round of radiation.
Yeah.
Brain radiation.
Yeah.
He had a surgery, and they were only able to move about half of the tumor.
Well, that was the first one.
Surgery.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so chemotherapy and radiation, the combination of that knocked out the other half.
Yeah.
And so he had a good 6 months where he, had no evidence of disease.
Yeah.
So he responded really well to that first round of treatment. He was doing keto at the time, and we had introduced a few off-label drugs,
but not much.
But not a lot.
Yeah. And our doctor at the time, I mean, not they were, he wasn't, he was very nice, and but he definitely was, and other doctors too, they just, for them, they didn't know about it. And so for them, they thought, well, that wouldn't be good for you. And it's gonna hurt me. And for us, we were kind of like, hey, I mean, what I have, how could it be any worse, And so that's why, so I, that point, that's when I got the second time.
Yeah. So then about 6 months after his, I guess, clear MRI, he had a recurrence.
Yeah.
And at that point, we just felt like we needed to throw everything at it. We needed to be somewhere different. We traveled to San Francisco for his second surgery.
And that was, when we went there, it was, so we in Alaska, I started getting sick. It was fast. I mean, really fast. And I started getting on this side, having issues like without a couple days, I would say.
Within a couple days.
Yeah, it probably until where it started getting worse, and then it got really, really bad. And so when we went to her sister, we went there, and the doctors there, they wanted to look at a different way, which was the what's it
A
called?
clinical trial.
Yes. And when we did that, they said, well, we'll wait. And I think it was like a week, and about 3 weeks, right? And then we'll come back and you can look at it and see how this would help, or if I could do it. And by that point, they looked at it and they said, no, I couldn't. And so at that point, I pretty much just sitting there, not doing anything, because I couldn't really do anything. It was hurting so bad, and my actual brain had moved all the way to the what's it called?
I think it's called a midline shift.
At that point, I mean, it was to the point where I couldn't really do anything. I mean, I couldn't think, I couldn't on this side, and so at that point they said that that we need to go. There's nothing they could do, so we decided to go back to where we lived in Alaska, and we started. That's when my wife started, because at that point I was kind of out of it, and I couldn't really think of all the different things, and she started thinking of different ways, different like pills that could be used, and every different things that we could do. So that's when we started doing what are they called?
Off-label medication.
Yes. Yeah.
So basically in 2018, Ian had his first recurrence at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
He had a second surgery.
Yeah.
And they removed all of it, but then within a couple of months it came back again.
Yeah.
So they put him on a really strong chemotherapy, a combination chemotherapy.
Yeah.
Which I will say we pushed for that. We pushed for the combination.
Yeah.
But it just tanked his
everything.
Everything. He was so sick. And by that point, the tumor was still growing.
Yeah.
And that's when we found out he might be eligible for the polio trial at Duke.
Yeah.
So that's when Ian's mentioning the polio trial.
Yeah.
We traveled from Alaska to Duke in North Carolina, and he ended up not being eligible because his deficits were too severe at that point.
Yeah.
And so they just recommended a third combination of chemotherapy and Avastin, and then he started that. But even through that, so this was like by fall, when he started that, we were told that the tumor looked like it was growing still. Yeah. And by that point, we decided we needed to move and just be closer to just cancer centers, like a major cancer center. Yeah. Because we had traveled across the country several times. Yeah. And we moved to Arizona. Yeah. And I stopped working. Ian couldn't work by that point. And so we just kind of threw everything we had in terms of off-label medications, introducing new medications, supplements. Yeah. He started a device called the Optune. Yeah. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. And he wears it to this day. So the Optune is a thing that you wear on your head. Yeah.
I don't have it on right now, but that's why I don't have hair.
Like we shave his head every 3 days so that the things can stick on his head. And it has become part of the standard of care for GBM patients. So it can be.
But I don't think it was before.
It was when you were first diagnosed. Okay. But then with everything, it was fairly new
and
still.
A lot of people, doctors and stuff, didn't think it would help anything or do anything. Even talking to them, they would say that.
Yeah, but it disrupts cancer cell division. And it was very new at this point. It was like one of the first. It was still finishing up a clinical trial in clinical trial. So, but he has been wearing that for the last 3 years, over 3 years.
And when we got here, when I started taking a lot of
supplements.
Yes. That's when, by that point, the the first doctor that we first got here, it kind of felt with us that there wasn't too much that we could do, which once again, um, I, I understand, but it's really hard for a person where you kind of feel like that looking at a person and you kind of know that they're saying something that they kind of feel like, yeah, that person's already dead. I mean, not to be, but I mean, that's kind of how it not should be mean, but I just kind of, I felt like that sometimes. Uh, so we went to, a little bit after that, we went to a different place, a doctor to go to. And that was where we started going to was
Barrow
yes,
Neurological Institute.
yes. And they were definitely more, what's it called? With
Open.
yes, with things. And so we started getting different. The best way to say it is
Medication.
yes, yes.
Off-label medications.
And so we started using that different things with using chemo, keto, and
You weren't on chemo at that.
oh no, I was still for a little bit.
Oh,
yeah, just for a little bit. But it was a different kind of than the.
You were on Avastin.
Yeah, and as well with what's it called for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit later, one of the doctor started looking at it, and he said that right now it's good. I mean, it was fine. And so at that point, we'd have. Don't get me wrong. There were times here and there that we didn't know what was going on, but it was usually something having to deal with. Just trying to figure out other things that we were dealing with. But we found out that really at that point there was no. It was what's it called? You could.
There was no evidence of active cancer.
Yeah.
So that was about 3 years ago, and it really lined up with when Ian started taking a lot of those off labels and supplements along with the Optune.
Yes.
But that combination has been one that he's stuck to for the last 3 years. And
then we did what's it called for going down.
Oh, yes. So Ian also did hyperbaric oxygen therapy.
Yeah.
He, even though there was no evidence of cancer, he is left with a lot of just necrosis in his brain. Yeah. And so that actually helped. It also helped him come off a very awful steroid medication that he was on long term.
Yes.
And caused a whole other range of issues.
Yeah.
So we were very fortunate to find a medical team here that is actually prescribing. Oh my gosh. We were fortunate to find a medical team here that is using hyperbaric oxygen treatment for brain tumors.
Yeah.
And recommended it to Ian. And they're also very open to other alternative therapies. A lot of their neurosurgeons recommend keto and fasting, and it's still a struggle with off labels sometimes. You get a lot of pushback, and I feel like we've seen, and we travel everywhere, and we've seen some of the best doctors, and it's always amazing that
they don't know what it is, or they don't. Yeah. I mean, especially it's almost I don't know. It's hard that there's people that think that it's just the only way that they've done it that certain way, so it should always do it that way. When really there's sorry, I can't say it.
No, I get it.
But there really is, for other people. I feel bad for other people, because there's a lot of people that they really don't know that there's other ways that you could I wouldn't say beat it, but maybe, I mean, I like in a way, there's, and don't get me wrong, there's things that there's issues that we still deal with, and but I'm forgetting one.
Yeah, I hear what you're
Yeah,
saying.
yeah.
Yeah.
It'll
For
be,
about 3.5 years, he is
yeah.
about 3.5 years out from
No,
from no active cancer.
yeah,
And at this point, he is considered, I think they consider him to be on maintenance. Like he gets his MRIs every 3 months now instead of every 2 months. But yeah, he's on maintenance. And then he's almost 5 years out from his initial diagnosis.
yeah,
But what's amazing is that he's 3 years out from a recurrent brain tumor cancer diagnosis.
yeah,
And you don't hear about that a lot.
yeah.
I mean, once it becomes recurrent, that is, I mean, I've even some of the long-term survivor stories that I've heard of is they were, they had a brain tumor, they did treatment and chemotherapy, and then they were fortunate enough to not ever have a recurrence.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've heard that more often than a recurrent long-term brain tumor.
Yeah.
So that's pretty amazing. And it's hard to pinpoint exactly what or why, but we really believe that it's a combination of everything that he has done.
Yeah.
And he will likely continue to do it.
Yeah.
It's so much easier. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, he fasted through chemotherapy. I think the second half of his 6 months, we decided that it might benefit him if he fasted. And even with that, there was so much pushback. Like,
Yeah.
well, what about his weight? And like his medical team was so worried about him even doing keto.
Yeah.
And worried about, whether he was eating a balanced diet.
Yeah.
Telling him that he shouldn't be doing chemo and fasting because he could drop weight and then he can't continue to do chemo. And I understand that is, a real concern. And for some patients, yeah, that you may have to just watch it closely, right? But like, if there's a potential that it can help,
Yeah.
what is the harm? I mean, chemo is awful.
Yeah.
And nobody bats an eye.
Yeah.
But if you ask for like metformin, all these questions are asked. Like, show me the literature and where did you see that, or where were you on Facebook to find that information?
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like I've been shut down so many times by doctors, even when I have a copy of like the literature in my hand.
Yeah.
So it is really, it has been very challenging and frustrating at times.
Yeah.
And also, yeah, I wish that information was more widely available.
Yeah. Thank the Lord I have her. From the beginning, I wasn't even thinking about anything. So she was thinking about it. She right from the beginning, she was starting to think, okay, well, what could I do to get through this? And then later too, that's when she started looking more into different kinds of to do things that would help. And I just kind of, we'd look at different things that we could do and pray and know that, looking at our not just doing whatever, but looking at it though there are maybe different ways that we could go through this, because I mean, really, we didn't want to just do like what the doctor said and say, okay, just do that and you're done by that time, by that point that you're, because you couldn't, because I couldn't say much. So it was just kind of like, sorry, I can't.
You early on, you could, but you were dealing with just chemotherapy. And just even emotionally, the diagnosis emotionally has its own toll, right?
Yeah.
And then just life. Like you have to show up at work and,
Yeah.
you know, and also just all of that is a struggle.
Yeah.
And I will say that initially I felt very angry with Ian for not helping me. I was like,
Still, I'm joking.
I didn't understand initially why he relied so much on me to do a lot of the research. And now I get it. It's like you can only handle so much. And the research is incredibly depressing.
Yeah.
And for his type of brain cancer.
Yeah. I remember when I was at work, and you know, a lot of it I didn't want to look at what people
statistics.
Yes. But one day at work, I was like, okay, well, I'll go look at it really quick. What, you know, how long time do you usually have? And it was actually less than I thought it was. And I was like, wow. I remember at that point, I was like, I think I went back to the house for a little bit for work, just because it was, for me, it was like, wow, this is just all, it was kind of just, it wasn't good for me to even look at it almost, just because everything that I was seeing, that it was just, there was nothing to do. And any of our friends that got it, or people that I not knew, but I saw, I mean, pretty much everybody that we know that had it are dead now. And it's not, you know, I'm not going to say that wasn't because they didn't do what they, you know, I don't exactly know why. I mean, but I think that it's been, I mean, a blessing that we've got to this long doing this, and being with each other and the kids, and feeling better. I mean, I would say every day.
You know, we went from a 2-income household, 2 professionals working, to basically a disability household, because at a certain point I had to leave my career and stay at home with Ian, because he needed me to be there for him. And so the financial cost of supplements and off-label drugs they're not cheap.
No.
Hyperbaric oxygen therapy is something that we looked at initially when he was first diagnosed. Yeah. And none of that is covered by insurance.
Same with what's the other stuff that
so we also looked at high dose vitamin C,
which we did a little bit,
and Ian did try that, and none of that is covered by insurance. But fortunately, later on down the road, I mean, once he had the necrosis in his brain, and it was, you know, that the HBOT was prescribed, then it was covered. But a lot of those therapies just really pay out of pocket for them if you want to do them. And that's a shame, because I feel like it's a big barrier for people who might be willing to try it. The cost is a huge barrier. Yeah. However, the cost for chemotherapy is insanely high. The cost for conventional treatments. I mean, at one point when Ian was on a combination of chemotherapies and the Optune, I think the monthly cost was close to $80,000 a month. Yeah. Whereas, you know, implementing keto and fasting and, you know, exercise, off-label medications and supplements probably cost, you know, $300 on average a month, maybe more. I mean, plus the cost of groceries, right? So the cost difference is so huge. Yeah. And it's just a shame that it's not more widely used and recommended by doctors and accepted by insurance providers and all of that. Yeah.
I think a lot of the doctors, when we first got, when I first knew that I was had it, the doctors didn't really know about like a lot of the things that we were that Abby was talking about, and it's kind of saying, no, it won't do it. It's not going to help anything. Actually, there were people that that doctors had said that when I was, and they just said it's not going to help anything. It's not going to do anything.
Or it's been researched already. People have tried that.
Yes.
That clinical trial might have been promising, but then later down the road, it was studied again, and in 20 people, and it wasn't.
And it's almost like, and I think a lot of them too. It's not that it's almost, and not to be mean, but I think a lot of them, not all of them, not all of them, but I think a lot of them, it's kind of like that's what they've heard. So that's what it is. That's how it should be. And not to say that they're trying to be mean or rude, but they just, it's kind of like what's one of those things that they've always know, or they learned from as a doctor, and that's what it is. That's later when I started becoming more of I understood that, made me feel like we might be able to actually do something about this. And so I would start, I thought more about like, we could think about things, what to do, rather than the doctor saying, this is what that they should do, or what should, they're saying that they should, saying that I should do this way. When we're kind of like, well, I know that's great, but I think we're going to try to doing this, even though the other doctors are saying, I don't know if you should do that. It's not going to, for everything that we've seen, it doesn't help anything. It doesn't, but it was hard. I mean, I definitely would say that, because I would think like, am I not thinking about my wife and my kids, when really it's not, maybe it wouldn't help. And maybe if anything, it would be harder. And I think there's things, we look back things from the beginning, not from the beginning, but some of the times that I'm like, maybe it would have been better to do this way or that way. It's hard to say. But yeah, I don't want anybody to feel like there's nothing else to do, but there is.
Yeah, I would say don't feel hopeless. There's a lot of stories like Ian's that that are out there that are not being shared, or they're not known. And I think they're just really good examples of patients kind of taking charge of their own health, and not necessarily tossing out what their doctor says, but adding to that and adding therapies that can complement that.
Yeah.